The bell above the diner door chimed at 4:47 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon. Ruth Morrison stood in the doorway, 79 years old, bleeding through her cardigan sleeve, 30 pounds lighter than she should have been, with bruises on both wrists, shaped exactly like fingerprints. Her left eye was swollen nearly shut. She swayed on her feet like a woman who hadn't eaten properly in weeks, because she hadn't. 8 men in leather vests looked up from the corner booth. Thunder Valley Motorcycle Club patches, road-worn faces, hands wrapped around coffee mugs. They'd been laughing about something, a joke that died the moment they saw her. Ruth took one step inside. The entire diner went silent. Even the clatter from the kitchen stopped. She opened her mouth to speak. Her voice came out as a whisper that somehow carried through the stillness. "My caregiver says if I tell anyone, I'll regret it." She gripped the door frame to stay standing. "But I'm already full of regrets, and I'm out of time." The biggest biker, a man with a gray beard and kind eyes, stood up fast enough that his chair scraped against the linoleum. "Ma'am," he said, moving toward her, "you need help?" Ruth nodded once. Then her legs gave out. She didn't know that one of these strangers owed her dead husband a debt written in blood 50 years ago. Didn't know that the man catching her before she hit the floor had been searching for Frank Morrison for 3 decades. Didn't know that walking through that door would save not just her life, but expose a predator who had killed before. She only knew one thing. After 184 days of silence, Ruth Morrison had finally found her voice, and she was never going to be quiet again. This story is fictionalized and inspired by true events. The names have been changed, locations altered, and certain details reimagined to protect the privacy and identities of those involved and the viewers who shared their experiences. Some characters are composites of real people, some timelines have been compressed, some conversations have been recreated from memory and witness testimony rather than recordings. The core truth remains: elder abuse is real, financial exploitation is real, and sometimes the people society fears most, the ones with leather vests and loud motorcycles, are the ones who show up when everyone else looks away. But the lesson about courage, about asking for help when you're trapped, about strangers becoming saviors when your own world fails you, that's as real as it gets. That truth is carved into court records, witness statements, and the hearts of people who were there. So wherever you're watching this from right now, whether it's your kitchen in Kansas, your living room in Louisiana, or your porch in Portland, drop your city in the comments below. Let's see how far a story about finding your voice can travel. Because someone in your town might need to hear this today. Someone might be trapped right now, thinking no one will believe them, thinking it's too late to speak up. This is for them. Now let me take you back to where Ruth's silence began. The morning Frank died, Ruth Morrison promised him she would be okay. It was a lie, of course. They both knew it. But some lies are kindnesses, and after 47 years of marriage, you learn which ones to tell. Frank's hand had gone slack in hers at 6:23 a.m., and Ruth had sat there until the hospice nurse came at 7, still holding on, still whispering that she'd be fine, just fine. He didn't need to worry. That was 18 months ago. Now Ruth stood in the kitchen of the cottage they'd bought in 1981, looking at Frank's coffee mug in the cabinet, dark blue ceramic with an anchor on the side, Navy in white letters underneath. She reached for it every morning out of habit, then stopped herself and took down the plain white one instead. She didn't know why. The blue mug just sat there on the shelf, gathering dust, a monument to routine that no longer existed. The mail came at 10:15. Ruth heard it hit the floor through the slot in the front door, but didn't get up to check it. She knew what was there. Bills she couldn't pay. Notifications she couldn't handle. Maybe another letter from the mortgage company, though she'd stopped opening those 3 months ago. What was the point? She had Frank's Navy pension, $2,100 a month, reliable as sunrise. Her own Social Security, $1,850, enough to get by if you were careful, enough to slowly drown if you weren't. The cottage was dying around her. She could see it in the way the wallpaper curled at the corners, peeling away from walls that Frank had painted 6 years ago when his hands were still steady. She could see it in the dishes piling up in the sink because washing them meant acknowledging she'd eaten alone. Again, she could see it in the curtains she kept drawn because Mrs. Chen next door waved every time she saw Ruth, and Ruth couldn't bear the pity in her neighbor's face. The medication bottles lined up on the counter like soldiers at attention. Heart pills, Metroprolol for the arrhythmia that had been getting worse since Frank died. Blood pressure medication, the white one she took every morning. Arthritis pills that barely touched the pain anymore. She took them with water at 8 a.m. exactly, the way Frank used to remind her. Now she had an alarm on her phone that beeped until she silenced it. Her daughter Jennifer's number was still programmed in that phone. Ruth looked at it sometimes, thumb hovering over the call button, never quite pressing it. 3 years since they'd spoken. 3 years since that fight about... Ruth couldn't even remember what they'd fought about anymore. Something about Ruth refusing to move to Boston, about Jennifer saying, "You're being stubborn for no reason," about Ruth saying something back that made Jennifer's face close up like a door slamming. Then Jennifer had gone back to Boston, and the phone had stopped ringing, and 3 years became a silence so vast Ruth didn't know how to cross it anymore. She set the table for one. That was new. Used to set it for 2 out of habit, then have to put 1 set of dishes away, and that hurt worse than just accepting from the start that she was alone. Toast and jam, weak tea. The jam jar was nearly empty. She should get more, but the grocery store felt impossibly far away, even though it was only 6 blocks. Through the kitchen window, she saw Mrs. Chen in her garden pulling weeds. The older woman looked up, saw Ruth's silhouette in the window, waved. Ruth stepped back before she had to wave back. She didn't know why. Mrs. Chen had always been kind, but kindness required something in return. Conversation, normalcy, pretending you were fine when you were slowly falling apart. On the kitchen table, partially hidden under the newspaper from 3 days ago that Ruth still hadn't read, sat a letter. The envelope was white with red lettering. "Final notice," stamped across the front. She'd opened it once, read the first line, "Your mortgage payment is 90 days past due," and put it back in the envelope. The house Frank had been so proud of, the cottage he'd maintained with careful hands, and Saturday afternoons on the roof checking for damage, was going to be taken away. And Ruth didn't even care. Maybe that was the worst part. The not caring. She finished her toast, washed her single plate, dried it, and put it away. Looked at the clock. 10:47 a.m. The whole day stretched ahead of her like a desert with no landmarks. She could watch television. She could read the book she'd started 4 months ago and never finished. She could sit in Frank's chair and pretend he was just in the other room. Instead, she picked up the phone and stared at the advertisement she'd torn from the newspaper 2 weeks ago. Compassionate Care Solutions, professional in-home care for seniors. Don't face aging alone. Don't face aging alone. Ruth had been alone for 18 months, and she was drowning. She dialed the number before she could change her mind. Angela Martinez arrived on a Monday morning at 8 a.m. sharp. She drove a white Honda Accord that looked recently washed, and she wore pale blue scrubs that suggested medical competence without being clinical. When Ruth opened the door, Angela smiled the kind of smile that made you want to trust her immediately. Warm but not excessive, professional but genuine. "Mrs. Morrison?" She extended her hand. "I'm Angela Martinez from Compassionate Care. It's so nice to meet you." Ruth shook her hand. Angela's grip was firm, confident. Her eyes were brown and direct, and when she looked at Ruth, she really looked. Not the way most people did, quick glances that slid away from the reality of old age. Angela saw her. "Please, come in," Ruth said, suddenly aware of the dust, the unmade bed visible through the bedroom door, the coffee mug she'd forgotten to wash. Angela didn't seem to notice any of it. She stepped inside, looked around with what appeared to be genuine interest. "What a lovely home! How long have you lived here?" 43 years. My husband and I bought it in 1981. "Is he?" "He passed 18 months ago." Angela's face softened with what looked like real sympathy. "I'm so sorry. That must be incredibly difficult." Ruth felt something crack inside her chest. When was the last time someone had said that? When was the last time someone had acknowledged that Frank's death wasn't just a fact to be mentioned and moved past, but a wound still bleeding? "Thank you," she whispered. The first month was everything Ruth had hoped for and hadn't dared to expect. Angela arrived each morning at 8. She made breakfast, scrambled eggs exactly the way Ruth liked them, not too runny, with toast that was actually warm and butter that had been softened. She organized Ruth's medications into a weekly pill organizer, each day clearly labeled, each time slot color-coded. She did laundry, folding clothes with a care that Ruth had stopped being able to manage, arranging them in drawers the way Ruth had always done it. She watered the garden, the tomato plants that Ruth had let die because bending down hurt her back, the roses Frank had planted that were struggling without care. Angela brought them back to life with patient attention, weeding and pruning, and Ruth watched from the window, feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. "Tell me about your husband," Angela said one afternoon. They were looking at photo albums. Frank in his Navy uniform, young and serious, his whole life ahead of him. Frank on their wedding day, Ruth in a simple dress they'd bought at Macy's for $43. Frank holding baby Jennifer, looking terrified and proud at the same time. "He served in Korea," Ruth said, touching the photograph. "USS Manchester. He never talked much about what happened there, but I know it changed him. He had nightmares sometimes, even 40 years later." Angela listened, really listened, asked questions that showed she was paying attention. "What was he like before the war?" Ruth smiled, remembering. "Funny, he had this laugh. You could hear it across a room. After Korea, he was quieter, but still kind, always kind." She looked at Angela. "Does that sound strange? Missing someone who was quiet?" "Not at all," Angela said. "Sometimes the quiet ones take up the most space when they're gone." Ruth felt tears starting and wiped them away quickly. "I'm sorry. Don't apologize." Angela squeezed her hand. "You loved him. That doesn't stop just because time passes." Ruth thought Angela might be the first person who'd understood that. The second month, small things began to shift. Angela suggested, "Let me manage your bills. You shouldn't have to worry about all that paperwork." She said it while they were having tea, casual as mentioning the weather. "Seniors are such targets for scammers these days. People call pretending to be from the bank, the IRS, Medicare. They steal thousands before anyone realizes. I can handle all that for you. Make sure everything's paid on time. Keep you safe." It made sense. Ruth had been falling behind on bills anyway. The mortgage notice, the credit card statements, the utility bills, they all blurred together into a pile of obligations she couldn't face. "That would be helpful," Ruth heard herself say. "I've been struggling to keep up." Angela smiled. "That's what I'm here for, to take care of things so you don't have to stress." Ruth gave her the checkbook that afternoon. It felt like handing over control, but also like setting down a burden she'd been carrying too long. A week later, Angela mentioned that Jennifer had called. "Your daughter," Angela said, "while you were napping. She said she'd call back this weekend." Ruth's heart leaped. "Jennifer called? Did she say anything else?" "Just that she was thinking of you, wanted to check in." Ruth waited all weekend for the phone to ring. It never did. "Maybe she got busy," Angela suggested when Ruth mentioned it Monday morning. "You know how kids are. Their own lives, their own problems. They forget about their parents sometimes." The words stung, but they felt true. Jennifer had her own life in Boston. Why would she remember to call? Another week passed. Ruth's bank statement arrived in the mail. She saw it through the front door slot before Angela picked it up. "I'll handle this," Angela said, tucking the envelope into her bag. "That's what we agreed, remember? I managed the paperwork." "I just wanted to see Mrs. Morrison." Angela's voice was gentle but firm. "This is exactly the kind of thing that causes you stress. That's why you hired me. To handle the details so you can focus on staying healthy and happy. Trust me, okay?" Ruth nodded. Angela was right. She was paying for this service. She should use it. But that night, Ruth lay awake thinking about the bank statement she hadn't seen, about Jennifer's phone call that never came, about the way Angela's smile sometimes didn't quite reach her eyes. She told herself she was being paranoid, told herself that grief had made her suspicious of kindness because she'd gone so long without it. She was wrong about that. 3 months in, Ruth found the bruises. She woke up one morning and saw them on her right wrist. Dark purple marks, 4 of them in a row, exactly the size and shape of fingerprints, like someone had grabbed her, hard. She stared at them in the bathroom mirror, trying to remember. Had she fallen? Had she caught herself on something? The bruises were 2, maybe 3 days old based on the color, but she couldn't recall anything that would have caused them. She pulled her sleeve down before Angela arrived. "How did you sleep?" Angela asked, bringing breakfast. "Fine," Ruth lied. That afternoon, Ruth tried to call Jennifer. She picked up the phone, dialed the number she knew by heart. Nothing. No ring, no voicemail, just silence. She tried again. Same thing. "Angela?" Ruth called out. "Something's wrong with the phone." Angela appeared in the doorway. "What do you mean?" "It's not working. I tried to call my daughter, but there's no dial tone." Angela took the phone, held it to her ear, pressed buttons. Her face showed concern. "That's strange. Let me call the phone company." She did, right there in front of Ruth. Spoke to someone for 5 minutes, nodding, frowning. When she hung up, she looked apologetic. "They said your bill hasn't been paid in 2 months. They disconnected service yesterday." "But," Ruth felt her face flush with embarrassment, "I thought you were paying the bills." "I am." Angela's voice was patient, like speaking to a child. "But remember, last month you wanted to make some of the payments yourself. You said you wanted to stay involved. I told you the phone bill needed to be paid by the 15th, and you said you'd handle it." Ruth searched her memory. She didn't remember that conversation. Didn't remember wanting to pay bills herself. "Are you sure?" she asked. Angela's expression shifted, just slightly, just for a moment. Something cold flickered behind her eyes before the professional warmth returned. "Mrs. Morrison, yes. We talked about it. Maybe you're forgetting." That was Ruth's greatest fear, that her mind was going, that she was becoming the confused old woman people pitied and dismissed. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I don't remember." "It's okay." Angela touched her shoulder. "That's why I'm here, to help you remember things, to keep you safe." But Ruth didn't feel safe. She felt like she was standing on ground that kept shifting beneath her feet. That night, she looked for the phone bill, searched through the drawer where she used to keep important papers. Empty. Looked in the desk. Nothing. All her financial documents were gone, given to Angela to manage. She sat at the kitchen table in the dark, looking at the bruises on her wrist, and for the first time since Angela had arrived, Ruth Morrison was afraid. Month 4 brought a discovery that made Ruth's blood run cold. She'd been looking for aspirin in the bathroom cabinet, a headache that wouldn't quit, when she noticed something. Her medication bottles were all there, labeled correctly, but the pills inside looked different. The metoprolol for her heart was supposed to be small, pink, round tablets. These were white, oval, wrong. She carried the bottle to the kitchen, hands shaking, and opened her laptop. Frank had bought it for her 5 years ago, taught her how to Google things. She hadn't used it in months. Angela said screens were bad for her eyes, that she should rest them more, but now she searched for images of metoprolol. Pink, round, not white, not oval. She checked the pill identifier website, typed in the markings on the white pills. Diphenhydramine, generic Benadryl, antihistamine, not heart medication, sleep aid. Something to make you drowsy, foggy, compliant. Ruth's hands were trembling so badly she could barely close the laptop. She checked the other bottles. The blood pressure medication, wrong pills. The arthritis medication, wrong pills. All of them replaced with something else, something that wouldn't kill her outright, but would keep her weak, confused, dependent. She looked up at the clock. Angela would be here in 20 minutes. Ruth put the bottles back exactly as she'd found them, arranged them in the precise order they'd been in. Then she went to her bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, trying to think through the fear clouding her mind. Someone was systematically drugging her. The person she'd trusted to take care of her was making her sick. The confusion, the memory problems, the exhaustion. It wasn't age. It was Angela. But why? The answer came when Ruth went looking for bank statements that night. She waited until Angela left at 6. "I'll be back tomorrow morning, Mrs. Morrison. Remember to take your evening medications," and then searched the house. She found Angela's bag in the guest room. The room that Angela had claimed as an office said she needed a workspace to manage Ruth's affairs properly. The door was usually locked, but today Angela had left in a hurry. Call from her mother, she'd said, and forgotten. Inside the bag, Ruth's missing bank statements. Ruth's hand shook as she unfolded them. Her savings account, the one she and Frank had built over 40 years, was nearly empty. $43,200 had been in that account 6 months ago. Now, $1,847. Credit card statements showed purchases Ruth had never made. Nordstrom, $3,200. Tiffany & Company, $2,800. Restaurants Ruth had never heard of. Plane tickets to Cabo San Lucas. Car payments for a BMW Ruth had never seen. She found receipts stuffed into an envelope. Designer handbags. Jewelry. Expensive shoes. All with Ruth's credit card numbers on the bottom. Her entire life savings gone. Frank's Navy pension, redirected to an account Ruth didn't recognize. Her Social Security diverted. She'd been financially gutted, and she hadn't even noticed because she'd been too drugged and confused to check. Ruth put everything back exactly as she'd found it. Her mind was racing, but she forced herself to be methodical. Angela couldn't know that Ruth knew. Not yet. Because that's when Ruth found the folder. It was at the bottom of Angela's bag, underneath the stolen bank statements. Manila folder with 2 names written on the tab. Margaret Hendricks, age 81. Deceased. Thomas Wu, age 79. Deceased. Inside, financial records that mirrored Ruth's. Savings accounts drained. Credit cards maxed out. Bank statements showing systematic theft over months, and death certificates. Margaret Hendricks died of heart failure, natural causes. Thomas Wu died of stroke, natural causes. Ruth's vision tunneled. She gripped the edge of the desk to stay upright. Angela had done this before, had stolen from elderly clients, drugged them, waited for them to die. Natural causes. No investigation, no questions, just another old person dead in their home, another estate to be divided, another predator, moving on to the next victim. Ruth was supposed to be next. She heard the front door open. Angela's voice called out, "Mrs. Morrison, I forgot my bag. Are you awake?" Ruth showed the folder back into the bag, her hands clumsy with panic. Got out of the guest room, closed the door silently, made it to her bedroom just as Angela came up the stairs. "Oh, there you are." Angela smiled. She was carrying her bag now, must have grabbed it from the guest room. "I thought you'd be sleeping." "Just resting," Ruth said. Her voice sounded almost normal. Angela studied her for a moment. "Did you take your evening medications?" The bottles were still on Ruth's bathroom counter. If she said yes, Angela might check. If she said no, "Not yet. I was about to. Let me help." Angela moved past her into the bathroom. Ruth watched Angela pour pills from each bottle, the wrong pills, the fake pills, into her palm. 4 of them. Enough antihistamine to knock Ruth out for the night. Keep her docile. Keep her confused. "Here you go." Angela held out the pills and a glass of water. Ruth took them, put them in her mouth, took the water, swallowed. Angela watched her throat, watched to make sure she'd swallowed. "Good. Now get some rest. I'll see you in the morning." She left. Ruth heard her go down the stairs, heard the front door close, heard the car start in the driveway. Then Ruth went to the bathroom and made herself throw up. All 4 pills came up, barely dissolved. She flushed them, rinsed her mouth, and sat on the floor shaking. She couldn't keep doing this, couldn't keep pretending to take medication, couldn't keep acting confused and compliant. Angela would realize something had changed. And then Ruth didn't let herself finish that thought. She needed help, needed to get out. But her phone was disconnected. Her computer, she checked. The Wi-Fi password had been changed. She was cut off, isolated. The doors. Ruth tried the front door. New lock installed. Key operated from outside. She didn't have a key. Back door. Same thing. Windows. She tried the one in her bedroom, painted shut. When had that happened? She hadn't noticed. She was locked in, trapped in her own home. Ruth sat in Frank's chair, the brown recliner that still smelled faintly of him, and looked at his photo on the mantel. Young Frank in his Navy uniform. The man who'd survived a war, who'd come home and built a life, who'd died thinking his wife would be okay. "I need you," she whispered to the photograph. "I don't know what to do." But Frank was dead, and Ruth was alone. She thought about her options. She couldn't call for help, couldn't leave the house, couldn't stop taking the fake medications without Angela realizing. She was being systematically poisoned, robbed, imprisoned, and nobody knew. Mrs. Chen next door thought Ruth was fine. Angela had probably told her that Ruth didn't want visitors. Jennifer thought Ruth was fine, if she thought about Ruth at all. The mail carrier, the few people who might notice something wrong, all saw Angela's car in the driveway every day and assumed Ruth was being taken care of. She was being taken care of the way Margaret Hendricks and Thomas Wu had been taken care of. Ruth sat in the dark and felt the walls closing in. Then she remembered something Frank had said years ago about being trapped behind enemy lines in Korea. "When you're trapped," he'd told her, "you don't wait for rescue, you create an opportunity." Angela came every day, Tuesday through Saturday, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., Sundays and Mondays. She had off. Spending time with family, she'd said. But on Thursday afternoons, Angela left for exactly 2 hours, 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. Gym and grocery shopping, she'd explained, regular as clockwork. 2 hours. That was Ruth's window. She just had to survive until Thursday. Ruth stopped swallowing the pills. Every morning, Angela watched her put them in her mouth, watched her drink water, watched her throat. But Ruth had learned to tuck the pills between her cheek and gum, to fake the swallow, to wait until Angela left the room before spitting them into her hand. She flushed them down the toilet one by one. 4 pills every morning, 4 more every evening. 8 tablets of antihistamines that were supposed to keep her foggy and compliant. Without them, Ruth's mind began to clear, the confusion lifted, the exhaustion faded, and with clarity came terror, because now she understood exactly how much danger she was in. "You're looking better today," Angela said on Wednesday morning. Her eyes were narrow, assessing, more alert. "I slept well," Ruth lied. She hadn't slept at all, hadn't dared to sleep, afraid Angela would check on her, would notice something had changed, would escalate whatever plan was already in motion. Angela tilted her head, studying Ruth like a predator watching prey. "Your color is good, too. Have you been taking vitamins?" "Just what you give me." Angela didn't look convinced. That afternoon, Ruth heard her on the phone in the guest room. The door was closed, but the old house carried sound. Ruth pressed her ear to the wall and listened. Becoming a problem, more alert than she should be, might need to expedite the timeline. Ruth's blood ran cold. No, I can make it look natural. Another week, maybe 2. Yes, I've done this before." The call ended. Ruth moved away from the wall, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might give out without Angela's help. 1 week, maybe 2. That's how long Ruth had to live. Thursday morning came. Angela arrived at 8 a.m. with breakfast and that professional smile that Ruth now recognized as a mask. They went through the routine: fake medication, small talk, Angela organizing things Ruth no longer controlled. At 2 p.m. exactly, Angela picked up her gym bag. "I'll be back at 4. Remember, don't answer the door for anyone, and no going outside. Your balance has been off lately. I don't want you to fall." Ruth nodded obediently, the confused old woman, the compliant patient. Angela left. Ruth heard the car pull away. She waited 5 minutes, then 10, making sure Angela wasn't coming back for something forgotten. Then she moved. The windows were painted shut, but she had Frank's old toolbox in the garage. She found a screwdriver, wedged it between the window frame and sill, pried. The paint cracked. The window didn't budge. She tried harder. Her arthritic hand screamed in protest. The window still didn't move. The front door, she checked the lock again. Key operated from outside. No way to open it from inside without the key. Angela had that key. Back door, same thing. Ruth stood in her prison of a house and felt panic rising. 2 hours, that's all she had. And she was trapped. Then she looked at the bathroom window. Small, high, but not painted shut. Angela must have missed it. Ruth dragged a chair from the kitchen, positioned it under the window, climbed onto it with shaking legs, every movement agony in her arthritic knees. The window opened, 6 inches, 12, just wide enough. Ruth looked down at the drop. 1 story, maybe 10 feet to the flower bed below. 10 feet that might as well have been 100 for a 79-year-old woman with brittle bones and a heart condition. She thought about Margaret Hendricks, about Thomas Wu, about dying in this house while Angela watched and waited and called it natural causes. Ruth Morrison had been afraid of a lot of things in her life, but she'd never been a coward. She climbed through the window. Her shoulders barely fit. She had to twist, had to ignore the pain shooting through her arthritic joints. Got her torso through, then her hips, then 1 leg. She was hanging half out of her bathroom window, hands gripping the sill, feet dangling in air. She let go. The fall seemed to last forever and end instantly. Ruth hit the flower bed, Frank's roses that Angela had been watering, and felt something crack in her left hip. Pain exploded white-hot through her body. She lay there, unable to breathe, staring up at the sky. "Get up." The voice in her head sounded like Frank's. "Get up, Ruth. You're not done yet." She rolled onto her side, pushed herself to her knees, got 1 foot under her, then the other, stood up, swaying, her hips screaming. Mrs. Chen was in her yard, pulling weeds from the garden. Ruth stumbled toward her. Every step was agony. Her vision blurred at the edges. "Mrs. Chen!" she tried to call out, but her voice came out as a croak. Mrs. Chen looked up. Her face went pale. "Ruth! Oh, my God, Ruth!" She dropped her trowel, ran toward the fence. "What happened to you?" Ruth collapsed against the fence. "Mrs." Chen caught her. "Help," Ruth whispered. "Please, Angela, my caregiver, she's trying to kill me." Mrs. Chen's eyes widened. Ruth could see the calculation happening. Confusion, disbelief, the instinct to dismiss the words of an old woman who was clearly injured and probably confused. "Ruth, honey, maybe we should get you to the hospital." "No." Ruth gripped Mrs. Chen's arm with desperate strength. "No hospital. She'll find me there. She has access to my records, my information. She'll find me and finish what she started. But you're hurt. Crossroads Diner. Ruth forced the words out. The truck stop. 2 miles. Take me there. Why? Ruth, that doesn't make sense. Please. Ruth was crying now. Please, Helen, I can't go back to that house. She's coming back at 4. She checked her watch with shaking hands. 53 minutes before she discovers I'm gone. Please. Something in Ruth's voice, some quality of absolute terror, must have convinced Mrs. Chen. She helped Ruth to her car, a painful, slow process that took 6 minutes they couldn't spare. They drove. Ruth watched behind them, expecting to see Angela's white Honda at any moment, expected to feel that hand on her arm again, those fingers that left bruises, that professional voice explaining to Mrs. Chen that Ruth was confused, that she wandered, that she needed to come home. Why the diner? Mrs. Chen asked. Ruth, I don't understand. Ruth didn't understand either, not completely. But she remembered something Frank had told her once, years ago, about the men he'd served with, about the brotherhood that existed among certain veterans, among people who understood loyalty in ways civilians didn't. Men on motorcycles, Frank had said, keep promises when everyone else forgets. Ruth had seen the motorcycles in the Crossroads parking lot. 8 of them. Thunder Valley patches. Men who looked dangerous to everyone else. But Ruth knew something about danger. She'd been living with it for 4 months. Sometimes the dangerous-looking people were the safest ones to trust. They pulled into the parking lot. The 8 motorcycles gleamed in the afternoon sun. Ruth, are you sure? Ruth opened the car door, stood, nearly fell, caught herself on the car. Blood soaked through her cardigan from where she cut herself climbing through the window. Her hips screamed with every step. She looked like a nightmare, gaunt, bruised, bleeding, barely able to walk. She looked like what she was, a woman who'd escaped death by inches. Ruth Morrison took 1 step toward the diner, then another, then another. Mrs. Chen called after her, but Ruth didn't stop. She pulled open the door. The bell chimed. 8 men looked up. Ruth opened her mouth to speak, and that's when her legs gave out. Ruth woke to voices. Severe malnutrition. Look at her. She's lost maybe 35 pounds, and these bruises, restraint marks. Someone grabbed her multiple times. The cut on her arm is fresh, within the last hour. Mrs. Chen, you found her like this? She came to my house, bleeding. She climbed out a window. She was terrified. Ruth's eyes opened. She was lying in a booth at the diner, someone's leather jacket under her head as a pillow. A blanket covered her. 8 men surrounded the booth, not threatening, protective, forming a wall between her and the door. The big one with the gray beard knelt beside her. Ma'am, can you hear me? Ruth nodded. I'm Mike Thornton. My club name is Bear. These are my brothers. He gestured to the others. You're safe here. Nobody's going to hurt you. Another man appeared, younger, maybe 40, with medical patches on his vest. I'm Diesel, former paramedic. Ma'am, can you tell me what hurts? Everything, Ruth whispered. Diesel examined her gently. Her hip, probably fractured, he said. Her wrist, sprained from gripping the window frame. The cut on her arm, not deep, but needed cleaning. Her vital signs, pulse elevated, blood pressure dangerously low. Ma'am, you need a hospital, he said. No. Ruth tried to sit up. Pain exploded through her hip. No hospital. She'll find me. Who? Bear asked. Who did this to you? Ruth looked at these strangers. These men with their leather vests and road-worn faces, men that most people would cross the street to avoid. And she told them everything. She told them about Angela, about the fake medications, about the stolen money, $43,200 in 6 months, about Margaret Hendricks and Thomas Wu, the two people who died under Angela's care, about being locked in her house, drugged into compliance, systematically robbed, and slowly killed. She told them about climbing out the bathroom window because it was that or wait to die. When she finished, the silence in the diner was absolute. Then one of the bikers, older than the others, maybe 60, with scars on his hands and face, spoke. His voice was hoarse. "You said your husband's name was Frank Morrison, Navy, Korea." Ruth nodded. "USS Manchester. He served 52 to 54. The scarred man stood up fast enough that his chair fell backward. "Frank Morrison from San Diego? Machinist's mate?" "Yes." Ruth stared at him. "How did you know that?" "Because your husband saved my life." The man's voice cracked. 1953. Fire on the ship during shelling off Wonson. I was trapped. Engine room burning. Your husband came through the flames and pulled me out. Burned his hands doing it. Never complained once." Ruth felt something break open in her chest. Frank had scars on his palms. He always said they were from working on engines. He lied. The scarred man wiped his eyes. "He got those scars pulling me out of an inferno. I've been trying to find him for 30 years. To thank him. To tell him I made it because of him." "He died 18 months ago," Ruth whispered. The man sat down heavily, put his face in his hands. "Then I'm 30 years too late for Frank," he said finally, "but I'm right on time for you." He looked at Bear. "Her name is Ruth Morrison, Frank Morrison's wife. That makes her family. We protect family." Bear nodded slowly. "We protect family." He pulled out his phone. "I'm calling Sheriff Patterson. We need law enforcement here." But before he could dial, the diner door opened. Angela Martinez walked in. She'd changed clothes, no more scrubs. Now she wore jeans and a casual top, her hair down, looking nothing like the professional caregiver. She scanned the diner, her eyes landing on Ruth. For just a moment, her mask slipped. Pure rage flashed across her face. Then the professional smile returned. She walked toward the booth. "Mrs. Morrison, thank God!" Her voice was perfect, concerned, relieved. "I came home and you were gone. I've been so worried. How did you get here? You could have been hurt." Ruth shrank back against the booth. "Mrs. Morrison," Angela continued, addressing the bikers now, "has some confusion issues. Early-stage dementia. She wanders sometimes. I'm her caregiver. Thank you so much for keeping her safe. I'll take her home now." She reached for Ruth's arm. Bear's hand shot out, caught Angela's wrist. "I don't think so." Angela's eyes went cold. "Excuse me? You're assaulting me." "No." Bear's voice was quiet. "Dangerous. I'm stopping you from assaulting her." He looked at Diesel. "Show her." Diesel pulled out his phone, showed Angela the photos he'd taken. Ruth's bruises, the restraint marks on her wrists, the malnutrition, the cut on her arm. "Those are from falls," Angela said smoothly. "She falls often. That's why she needs supervision." "And this?" Another biker, the one called Slider, held up Ruth's medication bottles. "These are supposed to be heart medication and blood pressure medication. They're antihistamines. You've been drugging her." Angela's professional mask flickered. "You went through her medications? That's illegal." "What's illegal," Slider interrupted, "is elder abuse, financial exploitation, false imprisonment, and I'm guessing murder once we look into Margaret Hendricks and Thomas Wu." Angela went very still. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Margaret Hendricks, age 81, died under your care 8 months ago. Thomas Wu, age 79, died under your care 6 months ago. Both had their savings drained. Both died of natural causes." Slider pulled out his phone. "I'm former police. I know how to run a background check. You've worked for Compassionate Care Solutions for 2 years. You've had 6 clients. 2 of them are dead. One," he gestured to Ruth, "escaped by climbing out a bathroom window." The diner door opened again. Sheriff Patterson walked in, 2 deputies behind him. "Mike called me," he said, looking at Angela. "Said there might be a situation here." Angela's face shifted through emotions too fast to track: rage, fear, calculation. Then she ran, not toward the door where the sheriff stood, toward the back exit, past the booth where Ruth lay. The scarred biker moved faster, caught Angela's arm, held her without hurting her, but held her firm. "You're not going anywhere," he said. His voice was granite. "You tried to kill Frank Morrison's wife. That makes this personal." Sheriff Patterson approached with handcuffs. "Angela Martinez, you're under arrest for suspicion of elder abuse and financial exploitation. You have the right to remain silent." Angela screamed. Not words, just pure rage. She thrashed against the cuffs, against the hands holding her. "She's lying. She's old and confused and lying. You're all going to believe some senile old woman over me?" Ruth sat up in the booth. Every movement hurt, but she sat up straight. "I'm not senile," she said. Her voice was steady, clear. "I'm a survivor. There's a difference." Angela lunged toward her. The deputies held her back. "You were supposed to die quietly," Angela hissed. "Just like the others. But you had to fight. You had to—" "That's enough." Sheriff Patterson pulled Angela toward the door. "You can finish that thought in an interrogation room." They took Angela out. Ruth watched through the diner window as they put her in the patrol car. Watched Angela scream soundlessly behind the glass. Watched the car drive away. Then Ruth started shaking, couldn't stop shaking. Bear wrapped the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "You're safe now. She can't hurt you any more." But Ruth wasn't shaking from fear. She was shaking from relief, so intense it felt like her body was trying to split apart. "I got out," she whispered. "I actually got out." The scarred biker, Jack Smoke Delgado, he'd introduced himself, sat beside her. "Frank would be proud of you," he said. Ruth looked at him. At this man her husband had saved 50 years ago. At these bikers who'd become her protectors. At the impossible chain of events that had brought her to this diner at exactly the right moment. "I think Frank sent me here," she said. "I think he made sure you were here when I needed you." Smoke wiped his eyes again. "Then he's still taking care of you, even now." Through the window, Ruth saw Mrs. Chen's car still in the parking lot. Her neighbor was crying, had probably been terrified watching Angela arrive, watching the confrontation, not knowing if Ruth would make it out alive. Ruth caught her eye through the window, mouthed, "Thank you." Mrs. Chen pressed her hand to the glass. An ambulance arrived. Diesel had called them despite Ruth's protests. The paramedics checked her over, started an IV, said her hip definitely needed X-rays. "Can we go to Portland?" Ruth asked. "Not the local hospital. Somewhere she can't find me." "She's in custody," Sheriff Patterson said. "She can't hurt you any more." "Please!" Ruth grabbed his arm. "Please, I can't. I need to be far away." She couldn't explain the terror still coursing through her, the certainty that Angela would somehow escape, somehow find her, somehow finish what she'd started. Bear spoke up. "We'll escort her. Thunder Valley will ride with the ambulance to Portland, all 8 of us. She won't be alone." Sheriff Patterson looked at Ruth, saw something in her face that made him nod. "Portland it is." They loaded Ruth into the ambulance. As the doors were closing, she looked back at the diner, at the booth where she'd collapsed, at the 8 motorcycles that represented the difference between death and survival. "Thank you," she called out. Bear smiled. "Thank Frank. He taught us what loyalty means." The doors closed. The ambulance pulled onto the highway, and 8 motorcycles fell into formation behind it, engines rumbling like thunder, escorting Ruth Morrison toward the first moment of real safety she'd felt in 184 days. Portland Medical Center, room 417. Ruth lay in the hospital bed with her hip in traction and IV lines running into both arms. The doctor said she was severely malnourished, dehydrated, anemic. Her heart showed signs of stress for months without proper medication. They'd found traces of diphenhydramine in her blood, enough to keep her sedated, but not enough to kill her outright. "You're lucky to be alive," the doctor had said. Ruth didn't feel lucky. She felt empty, hollowed out, like she'd used up every ounce of strength getting to that diner and had nothing left. Detective Sarah Park from the Elder Abuse Task Force sat in the chair beside the bed. She'd been asking questions for 2 hours. Ruth answered mechanically. Yes, Angela had isolated her from neighbors. Yes, Angela had controlled all her finances. Yes, Angela had switched her medications. Yes, she'd found evidence of other victims. Detective Park showed Ruth photographs, more names, more faces. Margaret Hendricks, found dead in her home 6 months ago. Heart failure, the death certificate said, natural causes. Thomas Wu, found dead in his home 4 months ago. Stroke, the death certificate said, natural causes. And 3 more. 3 more elderly people who died under Angela Martinez's care in the past 2 years, all ruled natural causes, all with their savings accounts drained, all with the same pattern of exploitation. "We're exhuming the bodies," Detective Park said. "Toxicology tests, looking for evidence of poisoning. But Mrs. Morrison, Ruth, you're the key. You're the only living witness. Without your testimony, we might not be able to prove murder. It'll just be theft charges." Ruth stared at the ceiling. "How long was I supposed to have?" "I'm sorry?" "Angela said on the phone that she needed to expedite the timeline, that she'd done this before. How long was I supposed to live before she killed me?" Detective Park was quiet for a moment. "Based on the pattern with previous victims, probably another month, maybe 6 weeks, long enough to drain your remaining assets. Then," she hesitated, "then she would have increased the sedative dosage," Ruth finished. "Made me sleep and never wake up. Called 911 in the morning. Cried about what a tragedy it was. Collected whatever was left of my estate as compensation for care rendered." "Yes," Detective Park said softly. Ruth closed her eyes. 6 weeks. She'd been 6 weeks away from death. "Margaret Hendricks had a daughter," Detective Park said. "Carla. She suspected something was wrong. Called Adult Protective Services 3 times. They investigated, found nothing. Angela was too careful. By the time Carla got through the bureaucracy and got guardianship proceedings started, her mother was dead." She showed Ruth a photo, a woman in her 50s with grief carved into her face. Thomas Wu had a son, David. He was deployed overseas. Army? Didn't know his father had hired a caregiver, didn't know his father's savings were gone until after the funeral. By then, Angela was gone. New identity, new job, new victim. Ruth looked at the faces of the dead. 5 people, 5 families destroyed. "She's done this before," Ruth whispered, "and she would have kept doing it." "Yes," Detective Park said, "until you." The words hung in the air. "You're the one who got away, Ruth, the one who fought back, the one who survived. Because of you, we can stop her. Because of you, no one else has to die." Ruth thought about that, about Margaret and Thomas and the 3 others whose names she didn't even know yet, about the person who would have been next after Ruth died. Some other elderly person, alone and vulnerable, trusting the wrong caregiver. "I'll testify," Ruth said. "Whatever you need, I'll do it." Detective Park squeezed her hand. "Thank you." After she left, Ruth lay alone in the quiet hospital room. The sun was setting outside her window, painting the sky orange and pink. She thought about Frank, about the man who'd pulled Jack Delgado from a burning engine room and never told her, about all the quiet heroisms of his life that she'd never known about because he didn't need recognition, didn't need thanks, just did what was right, because it was right. "I got out, Frank," she whispered to the empty room. "I did what you would have done. I fought back." But fighting back had cost everything. Her savings, gone. Her home, she couldn't go back there, couldn't live in rooms where she'd been imprisoned. Her health, damaged, maybe permanently. Her sense of safety, shattered. Ruth had survived, but she'd lost everything in the process. The door opened. A nurse came in to check vitals. "You have visitors," she said. "They've been in the waiting room since you arrived. Should I let them in?" Ruth nodded. 8 bikers filed into the room. They looked ridiculous in a hospital. Too big, too loud, too alive for the sterile white space. But Bear approached the bed gently. "How you doing, Ruth?" "I'm alive," she said. "That's something." Smoke sat in the chair Detective Park had vacated. "We talked to Sheriff Patterson. Angela's being held without bail. They charged her with 5 counts of murder, financial exploitation, elder abuse, attempted murder. She's looking at life in prison." Ruth nodded. "Good. We also talked to your mortgage company." This from Slider, the former cop. "Explained the situation. They're freezing foreclosure proceedings and—" He glanced at the others. "We talked to Compassionate Care Solutions, the agency that placed Angela in your home. They're being investigated. Turns out they didn't check her references. 2 of them were fake. They placed her anyway because they were desperate for workers." "They're liable," Bear added. "Their insurance company is talking settlement. Whatever Angela stole from you, they'll pay back, plus damages." Ruth felt tears starting. "You didn't have to do that." "Yeah," Smoke said simply. "We did. Because Frank saved my life. Because you're family now." They stayed until the nurse kicked them out at 10 p.m., promised to come back tomorrow, promised Ruth wouldn't be alone. After they left, Ruth lay in the dark and cried. Not from sadness, from something she couldn't name. Relief, maybe, or grief, or the strange alchemy of having survived something that should have killed her. She'd escaped, she'd fought back, she'd won, but winning felt hollow when there was nothing left to win for. Her phone, the hospital had given her a replacement after finding her old one disconnected, buzzed with a text, Unknown number. Ruth almost didn't open it. Then she did. "Mom, it's Jennifer. Mrs. Chen tracked me down. She told me what happened. I'm on the next flight. I'll be there by morning. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Ruth stared at the message, read it 3 times. Then she typed back with shaking hands, "I'm in Portland Medical, room 417. I'll be here." The response came immediately, "I'm coming. I love you." Ruth set the phone down, looked at the ceiling, felt something crack open in her chest, not breaking, but opening, like something frozen finally beginning to thaw. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in 184 days, Ruth Morrison slept without fear. 6 months later, Ruth Morrison sat in a courtroom and prepared to face her abuser. The trial had taken months to prepare. Detective Park had been thorough. They'd exhumed 5 bodies, run toxicology tests, found evidence of poisoning in 3 of them, high levels of sedatives, far beyond therapeutic doses. Margaret Hendricks had died with enough diphenhydramine in her system to kill a person half her size. Thomas Wu the same. The other 2 victims, too decomposed for reliable toxicology, but the financial records told a story. Identical patterns of theft, identical timelines, identical methods. Angela Martinez sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit. Her hair was pulled back in a severe ponytail, no makeup, no professional mask. She looked smaller than Ruth remembered, less threatening. But when Angela turned and looked at Ruth across the courtroom, her eyes held the same cold hatred they'd held that day in the diner. Ruth didn't look away. The prosecution presented their case methodically. Bank records showing $43,200 stolen from Ruth's accounts. Credit card statements. Purchases Angela had made. Designer bags, jewelry, vacations, all on Ruth's cards. Expert testimony about the medication tampering. Medical experts explaining how giving a heart patient antihistamines instead of prescribed medication could cause cardiac arrest. They called Detective Park, who testified about finding the files on Margaret Hendricks and Thomas Wu in Angela's possession. Called the medical examiner, who explained the toxicology findings. Called the agency Compassionate Care Solutions, whose negligence had enabled a predator. Ruth sat in the gallery and watched it all unfold. Jennifer sat beside her, holding her hand. Her daughter had flown in the morning after Ruth's escape and hadn't left since. They'd talked, really talked, for the first time in 3 years, about the fight, about grief, about how they'd both been drowning and had taken it out on each other instead of helping each other swim. They were working on it. Relationship wasn't magically fixed, but they were trying. Thunder Valley MC sat in the back row, all 8 of them. They'd come to every day of the trial, said they wouldn't miss it. "This is what we do," Bear had explained. "We see things through." On day 3, the prosecution called Ruth to testify. She walked to the witness stand on steady legs. Her hip had healed, mostly. She'd gained back 20 pounds. The malnutrition had reversed. The heart medication was correct now, monitored by doctors Jennifer had found, good doctors who listened. Ruth put her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. The prosecutor asked her to describe what had happened. Ruth told the story she'd told Detective Park, but this time to a jury of 12. Told them about hiring Angela, about the trust that had been built and betrayed, about the isolation, the drugging, the theft, about finding the files on Margaret and Thomas, about climbing out the bathroom window because it was that or die. The defense attorney tried to rattle her during cross-examination. Mrs. Morrison, isn't it true that you have memory problems? That you'd been struggling with confusion before Angela ever came to your home? I'd been struggling with grief, Ruth said. Not confusion. My husband had just died. I was depressed, but I wasn't incompetent. But you hired a caregiver because you couldn't manage on your own. I hired a caregiver because I was lonely and needed help with daily tasks. That doesn't mean I deserve to be robbed and poisoned. The attorney shifted tactics. You claim my client replaced your medications, but isn't it possible you were confused about which pills you were supposed to take? I looked them up online, compared the pills to photographs. They were wrong, deliberately wrong. But I'm 79 years old, Ruth interrupted. That doesn't mean I'm stupid. I can use Google. I can read. I can tell when someone is systematically trying to kill me. She looked at the jury. Your client drugged me, robbed me, and imprisoned me in my own home. She did the same thing to Margaret Hendricks and Thomas Wu. They died. I didn't. Not because I was lucky, because I fought back. The courtroom was silent. The defense attorney had no response. They called character witnesses for Angela, former employers who said she'd been a good caregiver, former clients who said she'd been kind. But the prosecution countered with families of the dead. Margaret's daughter, Carla, who testified about her mother's sudden decline, the confusion she'd attributed to dementia that had probably been drugging. Thomas's son, David, who'd been deployed overseas and came home to find his father dead and his savings gone. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they came back, Angela's face was stone. Ruth held Jennifer's hand so tight her fingers went numb. On the count of murder in the first degree of Margaret Hendricks, guilty. On the count of murder in the first degree of Thomas Wu, guilty. On the count of attempted murder of Ruth Morrison, guilty. On the count of elder abuse, guilty. On the count of financial exploitation, guilty. Guilty on all 37 counts. The courtroom erupted. Carla Hendricks sobbed. David Wu closed his eyes, lips moving in what might have been prayer. Thunder Valley MC stayed silent, but Ruth felt their presence like an anchor. The judge set sentencing for 2 weeks later. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Ruth didn't talk to them, let Detective Park handle the press. But she walked past them with her head high, Jennifer on one side, Bear on the other. "How does it feel?" one reporter shouted. "Getting justice?" Ruth stopped, turned. "It doesn't bring them back," she said. "Margaret, Thomas, the others. Justice doesn't resurrect the dead, but it stops her from killing again, and that's what matters." Sentencing day. The courtroom was packed. Families of the victims. Thunder Valley, MC Press. People who'd followed the case and wanted to see how it ended. Ruth sat in the front row, Jennifer beside her. Ready. The judge called Angela Martinez forward. She stood, orange jumpsuit, handcuffs, flanked by deputies. The judge spoke. "Angela Martinez, you preyed on the most vulnerable members of our society. You betrayed the trust of people who hired you to care for them. You stole their money, poisoned them, and watched them die. In the case of Mrs. Ruth Morrison, you came close to succeeding in murder, but she survived. She fought back. She brought you to justice." The judge paused. "The law allows for a maximum sentence of life without parole. The prosecution has recommended life. The defense has asked for leniency." Angela's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, my client has mental health issues, a troubled childhood." "Everyone has a story," the judge interrupted, but not everyone uses their story as an excuse to murder elderly people for money. He looked at Angela. You will serve life in prison without the possibility of parole, on each count. Sentences to run consecutively. You will die in prison, Ms. Martinez, just as your victims died in their homes, but they died alone and afraid. You'll die knowing exactly what you did and what you lost. He brought down the gavel. Angela screamed, lunged toward Ruth. The deputies caught her. You ruined my life, she shrieked. You were supposed to die. You were supposed to... They dragged her out. Ruth watched her go, felt nothing but relief. Outside, Carla Hendricks approached, Margaret's daughter. She was crying. Thank you, she said. My mother, she tried to tell me something was wrong. In the end, she couldn't speak clearly anymore, but she kept trying, and I didn't understand. But you did. You fought back for her, for all of them. Ruth hugged her. Your mother didn't die in vain. None of them did. Because of what happened to them, I knew what Angela was, and I got out. David Wu approached next, Thomas's son. My father served in Vietnam, survived that, came home and built a life, and he died because he trusted the wrong person. His voice broke. But you survived. You testified. You made sure she paid. That means something. That means everything. They stood on the courthouse steps, victims' families, Thunder Valley MC, survivors and witnesses, and Ruth felt something shift. The weight she'd been carrying since that day in the diner finally lifted. She'd survived. She'd testified. She'd won. 1 year later. Ruth Morrison stood in the community room of Riverside Senior Living and looked at the 40 people gathered for her talk. The room was full. More chairs had been brought in. People sat in wheelchairs, on walkers, leaning on canes. Elderly faces, each one carrying decades of life and experience. My name is Ruth Morrison, she said. 1 year ago, I was being systematically poisoned by my caregiver. I was drugged, robbed, and imprisoned in my own home. I was 6 weeks away from being murdered, and nobody knew. The room was absolutely silent. I'm here to tell you that it's never too late to ask for help. That being old doesn't mean being powerless. That if something feels wrong, if someone is controlling your money, isolating you from friends, making you feel confused or crazy, trust that instinct. She told her story. Not all of it. That would take hours. But the essential parts, the warning signs she'd missed, the red flags she'd ignored, the moment she'd decided to fight back. I climbed out a bathroom window, she said, fractured my hip doing it, bled through my cardigan, collapsed in a diner, and 8 strangers, bikers, people that most of you would probably cross the street to avoid, they saved my life. She gestured to the back of the room where Thunder Valley MC stood. They'd come for this, too. They always came. They saved my life because that's who they are, because they understand loyalty, because they know that protecting the vulnerable isn't just words, it's action. After the talk, people approached her. Some wanted to share their own stories, abusive family members, financial exploitation, caregivers who weren't quite right. Ruth listened to all of them, gave them Detective Park's number, made sure they knew they weren't alone. An elderly man in a wheelchair waited until everyone else had gone. My son's wife controls my money, he said quietly. She says it's for my own good, but I don't know where it's going. And when I ask questions, she gets angry. Ruth knelt beside his wheelchair. That's called financial abuse, and it's not okay. Would you like help? He nodded. tears in his eyes. Ruth pulled out her phone, called Detective Park right there, started the process of investigation, protection, justice. This was her life now. Volunteer advocate, speaker, survivor who helped other survivors. Jennifer had moved back to Oregon, not to Belmont, but to Portland, close enough to visit every week. She'd left her job in Boston, started over, said being near her mother mattered more than career advancement. They had dinner every Sunday, cooked Frank's recipes, told stories, rebuilt what they'd lost. Ruth lived in Riverside Senior, living by choice. Small apartment, her autonomy intact, but with community around her, with people who checked on each other, with safety built in. Frank's Purple Heart sat on her mantel, his coffee mug in her cabinet. She used it every morning now. His Navy photograph on her nightstand. He was gone, but he was still with her, still guiding her, still proud. That evening, Thunder Valley MC stopped by. They did this twice a month, brought coffee, played cards in the community room, made the other residents nervous at first until they realized these scary-looking men were gentle as lambs with the elderly. Smoke sat across from Ruth, studying his cards. Frank would be proud of you, you know, what you're doing, helping people. I think about that, Ruth said, about how he pulled you out of that fire and never told me, about all the quiet ways he was a hero. He was, Smoke agreed, but so are you. Ruth smiled. I'm just doing what needs doing. That's what heroes do, Bear said from across the table. They do what needs doing, even when it's hard. Through the window, Ruth could see the garden. She'd planted tomatoes. Frank had loved tomatoes. They were growing strong and healthy, red fruit ripening in the sun. She'd survived. She'd fought. She'd won. And now she was helping others do the same. The phone on the wall rang, the community room phone that anyone could answer. Ruth got up, picked it up. Riverside Senior Living. Is this, a woman's voice trembling, is this where Ruth Morrison lives? The woman who speaks about elder abuse? Yes, Ruth said. This is Ruth. I need help, the woman whispered. My caregiver? Something's wrong. I don't know who else to call. Ruth grabbed a pen. Tell me your name. Tell me where you are, and tell me what's happening. As the woman talked, Ruth wrote, made notes, asked questions, and when the call ended, she looked at Thunder Valley MC. We have a situation, she said. They stood immediately, ready, because this was what they did. This was who they were. Survivors who helped survivors, warriors who protected the vulnerable, people who understood that heroism wasn't about capes and powers. It was about showing up when someone needed help. Ruth Morrison had spent 184 days silent, trapped, dying slowly. Now she used her voice to help others find theirs. Frank would be proud. She was proud, and that was enough. Elder abuse affects 1 in 10 Americans over the age of 60. Financial exploitation is the most common form, but physical abuse, emotional abuse, and neglect are devastatingly common. The victims are often too ashamed to report, too afraid no one will believe them, too isolated to reach out for help. Ruth Morrison was almost one of those statistics, almost one of the silent dead. But she fought back. She asked for help. She survived. And because she survived, 5 families got justice, 5 murders got solved, and 1 predator got stopped before she could kill again. This story is about Ruth, but it's also about the unlikely heroes who answered when she called. About 8 bikers who understood loyalty better than most people understand love. About neighbors who finally paid attention. about a daughter who came back, about strangers who became family. Ask the elderly people in your life, are you okay? Really okay? Look for warning signs, isolation, sudden financial changes, caregivers who control access, confusion that seems manufactured, bruises that don't have good explanations. If you see something, say something. Report to Adult Protective Services. Call law enforcement. Don't assume someone else will handle it. Don't tell yourself it's not your business. Everyone is your business. Every person suffering in silence is your responsibility. Because you might be the only one who sees, the only one who asks, the only one who answers. Ruth found her voice at 79 years old in a truck stop diner surrounded by bikers. It's never too late. If you're suffering right now, if someone is hurting you, stealing from you, making you feel crazy or worthless, tell someone, anyone. Keep telling until someone listens. You're not too old to matter. You're not confused. You're not a burden. You're valuable. You're worth protecting. You're worth saving. And there are people who will help. You just have to ask. For the Ruth Morrison in your town who's still trapped, still silent, still hoping, share this story. Not for views, not for likes, for her. So she knows she's not alone. So she knows there's a way out. So she knows that asking for help isn't weakness. It's the strongest thing she'll ever do. Ruth Morrison found her voice. Help someone else find theirs. Where are you right now as you finish this story? Drop your city in the comments. Let's see how far this message can travel. Because someone in your town needs to hear it today. Someone is trapped. Someone is silent. Someone is waiting for permission to speak. Be the person who gives them that permission. Be the person who listens. Be the Thunder Valley MC of someone's life. Show up. Pay attention. Answer when someone calls. That's all it takes. That's everything.